Insight is in very short supply right across the leadership world. Now, insight is the ability to connect the right pieces of knowledge and link them together in new and fresh and unexpected ways, and that's the trick. Now, of course, there are countless business stories and case studies that showcase true insight in action, from Walmart to Apple to Japanese sushi, and these are all stories we're going to learn from in today's episode, and others. But let's clear something up before we begin. Great leaders focus on developing insight, and good leaders do not, either because they don't have the stamina, the wit, the patience, or more importantly, I suspect, they haven't developed actively the wisdom for it. I'm Antonio, and today I'm going to be your leadership coach. And over the next 30 to 45 minutes, we're going to learn from some really powerful business examples, some stories together, and really begin to understand how insight paves the way for wisdom and how that wisdom leads to real lasting leadership impact. And this way, you too can finally begin to stop managing and start leading. We normally draw models in our episodes, not today though. However, all models that we have drawn in previous episodes and future episodes are always available as complimentary digital downloads at www.mydailyleadership.com/podcast. Okay, so some leadership insight stories for you today. I'm taking today's story from this rather splendid book. We're going to talk about another book in a minute. My Daily Leadership by my good self. And with every book, you get a free photo of me right there. If you do get the chance, do check out the book. It's full of useful stuff. Here's an example. So here are some random insights we're going to talk about. They're all from the book. So page 158, if you bothered. What's the most widely printed book in history? I'm hoping the producers have put some interesting music on in the background whilst you're having a think about that. Now, some of you are going to be saying the Bible, I imagine. Some of you might be saying the Quran. Some of you might be saying Harry Potter. I don't know. It's actually the IKEA Catalogue. Now, before you start foaming at the mouth and sending me emails going, the IKEA Catalogue isn't a book. Well, actually, anything printed on pages and bound is a book. So let's not split hairs, but let's just accept that. Oh yeah, that makes sense, because there are billions and billions, with a B, of IKEA catalogues printed every year and distributed, and it out-distributes, if you like, the Bible and the Quran and all of those good things. So what's my point? My point is that once you see it, you recognize and you go, yeah, okay, that makes perfect sense. The trick is the seeing it. So we're going to give you some examples today and see if they help you out. And by the way, just as a quick PS on that IKEA thing, they actually just recently made a decision to stop printing the IKEA catalogue. So you can only get it online. Maybe in, I don't know, let's say 6 months' time, the answer might be Harry Potter. I don't know, but you get the idea. So let's move on. So that's IKEA catalogues. Let's talk about shoes. An organization called Bata shoes. You've probably never heard of Bata shoes. Well, actually, Bata produce billions of shoes every year. Let me tell you the story. So, if you're in the world of footwear, by the way, you already know this story, but most people, if they're not, don't. So in Victorian era, so the year specifically, I don't know. So in the former British Empire, which, you know, historians will tell you, we kind of ruled most of the world for a couple of hundred years. But anyway, so the Industrial Revolution came by, right? And lots of British organizations were going around the world, colonies, perhaps, terrible word. But anyway, they were going around the world trying to see if there were opportunities to sell their wares and set up factories and all of that kind of stuff. And there's an organization called Bata Shoes. They weren't the only shoe manufacturers in the world, and lots of shoe manufacturers were trying to do similar things. Anyway, 3 or 4 other shoe manufacturers found themselves in Africa, and typically they wrote back to their HQ and said, okay, we've checked out Africa. billions of people live here, but nobody wears shoes, so there probably isn't a market for us. However, when the representative from Bata Shoes went to Africa and saw exactly the same thing as every other shoe manufacturer, kind of had a different approach. They said to themselves, hold on, there are billions of people here and nobody wears shoes. In other words, exactly the same as everybody else said. But their tonality, I think, was different, or their appreciation of the potential was different. And they immediately telegrammed back to say, there are billions of people here and nobody wears shoes. This should be the place that we set up factories. So everybody else kind of didn't see the insight. They saw the same situation that everybody else did, but only the Bata Shoes people said the opportunity here is huge because nobody wears shoes. And even today, if you've traveled around Africa, you have definitely seen people with Bata shoes on. It's the leading premier brand of shoes in Africa. They sell billions, even today. They cornered the market a couple of hundred years ago and they still have it today. And I can't imagine how many billions of shoes they have sold. So think about that. Think about where possibilities lie. Think about where you've already, in the past, discounted markets because, maybe you just look and get it wrong. So that's number one. Bata shoes. What's next? Walmart. Now, Walmart, still on page 158, by the way. Now, Walmart, as you know, started by Sam Walton, one of the most, certainly, if not the world's largest retailer. I can't imagine who's bigger. But anyway, everybody knows Walmart. Everybody's been into Walmart. Here's what Sam did. Sam was quite interesting and innovative, and he had a nice piece of insight as he was building up his Walmart empire early on. Most retailers did this. They looked at a map, right? Some kind of demographic kind of, like a heat map. Where's densities of populations, right? Densities of traffic and all of that kind of stuff. And they put pins right in the middle of all the hotspots in heat maps that were looking at densities of population, spend, and all of that good stuff, the stuff that you imagine. Now, what did that mean to all of those retailers setting up those stores? Well, it actually meant that they were putting up stores in areas where land was probably the most expensive, right, that you could find, right, because it was right in the middle of densely populated areas, lots of competition for land. They were probably using contractors and architects and builders, right, who were super duper busy. Why? Because they were building houses and lots of other things, right? They were also trying to vie for land where there was most competition, right? They were in locations where there was lots more of their competitors, right? And everyone was kind of like fighting for the same dollar. And it was really difficult and it was expensive. And Sam Walton said, you know what we should do? Instead of looking and putting dots right in the middle of those heat maps, we should put dots right in the middle of two heat maps. So find a heat map, find another heat map with lots of population and all of that kind of stuff. Let's put a dot right in the middle where nobody is. And let's see if we can attract all of the people from here and all of the people from here, right? They don't have to drive too far, but let's put them in the middle. I don't want to say of nowhere, right? But let's put them in the middle, in the spaces between all of the red dots on the map. The spaces between where competition is lower, where it's easy to get in and out of, right? Because you don't have to fight with traffic, where there are contractors who probably have, some free capacity, right? Where land is cheaper, right? And it was that where Walmart said, let's build bigger stores in the middle where all of our competition aren't. Bruce Lee, right? If you don't know who Bruce Lee is, I do feel sorry for you, but Bruce Lee said the best way to avoid a punch is to not be there. And that's what Sam Walton did. He avoided all of the punches from the local competitors right in the middle of the heat maps. And he went in the spaces and the gaps in between. Is there something for you there, I wonder? Have a think about it. Page 161, Apple, Steve Jobs. There are countless, millions of stories about Steve Jobs and moments of aha, moments of insight. I'm going to give you one that isn't in the book. It's one of my favorites. And then I'll give you the one that is in the book. When they were first developing the iPod, if any of you are old enough to know what the iPod is, bless you. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I hate you enormously. But when they were trying to devise a machine, a mechanism that could carry music, not like a Discman or anything like that, right? But something that could carry hundreds and hundreds of tracks of music. Steve Jobs asked his engineers, hey, can you make it as small as humanly possible? Use the smallest components, design such they fit together as tightly as possible so that the machine is as small as it can possibly be. They brought, after some time, the first prototype. So this was number 1 of 1 in the world to Steve Jobs. And he said, this is it, Steve. This is as small as we can make it. He said, no, you can make it smaller. I want it smaller than that. And he said, no, Mr. Jobs, that's as small as it can possibly be. I don't believe you, he said. I think it can be made smaller. No, said the engineers. Let's see, said Steve. Got up from behind his desk, walked over to the fish tank in his office and dropped it, 1 of 1, the only one that existed in the universe, into his fish tank. Bubbles came out. And he said, until I can drop this into the water and no bubbles come out, we can make it smaller. Don't you love that? Okay, anyway, that's not what today's story is about. Today's story was about when Steve Jobs first came back to Apple. So for those of you that know, he was at Apple, founded it, squeezed out by the board. They realized some years later they made a mistake and they asked him to come back in. Great. So this was 1998. This was just at the time where the iMac was ready to be launched. And again, if you know what an iMac is, God love you. If you don't, I hate you. But the iMac was developed so that his vision was that every household, every desk could have a computer on it, which of course now is the case. But that wasn't the case. But that was Steve Jobs' dream, that every desk, every student, every house would have a computer. Of course, now they are ubiquitous, right? But this was back in the day. And they were just about to launch, just as he came back, the iMac. And he had a look at it. So, okay, show me the prototypes. And they'd actually already industrialized it and prototyped. And they had in stock, I don't know, millions and millions. I don't want to say billions because I don't know, but certainly millions and millions. All boxed, packaged, ready to rock and roll. They were just about to launch. Steve had a look at it and said, nope, you've missed the point. We've got to scrap this. We've got to start again. And of course, everyone went bananas because they had industrialized it, right? They were manufacturing it in huge numbers, ready for the launch. The ad campaigns were ready to rock and roll, right? They were ready to go with their launch stocks. And Steve said, they're kind of like this color, like a beige color. It wasn't quite this color, but like a khaki, beige, corduroy, right, kind of color. Awful. And Steve said no, because that's what color all of those kind of computers were in the world. Steve said no, they've got to be primary colors. Let's pick blues and greens and reds and yellows, right? Bright colors. Now, everybody thought he was crazy, right? Because hitherto, they had always been that kind of, I'm looking for the right kind of beige. I can't find it, but you know the thing, I'm hoping. Beige, right? Just think beige, right? Magnolia, I guess. And when somebody said to him, why? We've got them ready to go. He said, no, you've got to scrap all of the outers. You've got to make them new. You've got to give them new cases in pink or blue or red, right? Why? They asked him. He said, because I want everyone to know. I want it to become a status symbol so that when it's on your desk, everyone knows. They can't ignore it. They can't miss it. They can't not know what it is. They can't know that it's an Apple product. So he made them bright blue or bright yellow, right? If you remember that launch, those 4 primary colors. So that, he said, that everybody would know if you had an apple. And do you know what? Genius. What was the genius? What was the insight? The whole world had hitherto made them beige, so let's not make them beige. I used to have a CEO that said, when everybody zigs, zag. You get the idea. Okay, so next. Actually, no, just before we do that, I need you to remember, if you don't remember, go look it up. The ad slogan, right, the tagline that went with the ad after everybody calmed down, right, and repackaged everything. Sorry, all capitals, right, all caps. Sorry, no beige, full stop. Think different. Love it. Apple, obviously. So next, this is a great story. I love this story. And people think it's one of those apocryphal stories that aren't actually quite true, but kind of sound like they might be true. This is one of those true ones. So there was a guy, he was a bus driver. He was a good bus driver, sure. And he was, bus drivers get very used to driving their routes, right? And to the extent that eventually they can kind of do it with their eyes closed. This is in the UK, by the way. I don't know what bus route he drove, but he drove his route, drove it very well. Oh, and also remember, for those of you watching in the US, in the UK, not all buses, but most buses, they're double decked, right? They're two levels high. They're not just kind of the low buses that you tend to see in the US, they're double-decker buses. That's why they're called double-decker buses, right? Anyway, so this is this bus driver driving his normal route. And for some reason, he had to drive a new route today. So instead of driving the 157, he had to drive the 46. I used to get the 157 to university, and I used to get the 46 to school. But anyway, so it was a new route for him. So he was a really good driver, but it was a new route. And somebody showed him the route, said, look, here's how the 46, it goes here, and then you go left, then you go right, da-da-da-da-da. Right, okay. So he jumps into his bus and off he goes. And he's trundling along and he's thinking he's going the right way, which of course he is. But there then comes a point where he took a left and he should have carried on. And he took a left, and as he came around the corner, like instantly upon this corner was a low bridge. And it was one of those old Roman bridges, like 2,000 years old, right? And it was a protected, like a heritage bridge. Here's the thing about this bridge, though. This bridge was lower than the bus was high. So unfortunately, as the bus driver came around the corner, hit a bridge that he didn't know was there, right? And he rammed his bus under the bridge. Fortunately, there was nobody on the upper deck at the time. But here's the thing. So the bus is now stuck under this bridge. Now, they had to get the bus out from under the bridge. Now, you might just have thought, well, just dismantle those parts. It was a stone bridge, right? One of those. Just take apart the bridge. Well, unfortunately, this bridge was super duper protected, as I mentioned. I'm not saying it was a UNESCO World Heritage Site, but not far off it, certainly in the UK. And there were protective orders on the bridge and no one was allowed to touch the bridge. So how do we get the bus out from under the bridge? Well, anyway, pretty quickly, so the bus driver, radioed in, telephoned in the fact that he's stuck under a bridge, and lots of engineers were alerted and people came and they had a look at it, and cones and tape and all of that, and traffic was backed up, and they had to quickly try to get this bus out from under the bridge where it was jammed and rammed stuck. So they sent for the Corps of Engineers, which is part of the army, to see if they could help, and they had a look at it and said, look, the only thing that we can think of doing, if we can't touch the bridge, we're going to have to get some welding equipment, some torches here, and we're going to have to cut off parts of the top of the bus. Did I tell you that nobody was injured up there? But anyway, there wasn't, fortunately. Anyone sat up at the front. So they were just about to start cutting up this bus when a young schoolboy who'd recently just got let out of school was on his way home. He was walking home and he was walking past the scene, and there were lots of people and there were lights, right? Television crew, right? It was a big deal. Not for the bus, but for the bridge. The bridge was a deal, right? And he asked the policeman, he said, what's going on? And the policeman said, move along, son, right? Nothing to see. He said, but what is going on? He said, well, this bus, right, got stuck under the bridge, and we're trying to figure out how to get the bus out from under the bridge. Those guys there are just about to start cutting the bus in half. The little lad looked at the policeman and said, well, why don't they just let the air out of the tyres and reverse it out? Quick pause for some housekeeping. For those of you joining us for the first time, welcome. I'm Antonio Garrido. I'm the founder and president of My Daily Leadership. As a serial entrepreneur, business leader, and author of 3 books, soon to be 4, I've had the opportunity to work with everyone from emerging startups to Fortune 60 powerhouses, helping them create better leaders and grow sustainably. Now, when we first launched this podcast, our goal was this. It was real simple: to deliver real value and ROI to busy leaders just like you. We understand that you're constantly juggling a lot, which is why we try and pack each episode with lots of practical advice and tools that you can implement or learn from immediately. So do me a favor, if you found anything useful so far, please do take a brief moment to like, subscribe, or follow us on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform. Listen, your support really helps us reach more leaders and helps more people like you find us. People who are as committed to growth as you are. And if you're listening on YouTube, I'd love to hear from you. Really would. Share your biggest leadership challenges in the comments, and we'll either point you to an episode that tackles that thing, or we'll create a special one just for you. We genuinely read every comment and we genuinely respond to everyone. Okay, so before we jump back in, don't forget that all the models from previous and future episodes are available for free on our website. Our amazing podcast producers take my drawings and transform them into beautiful downloadable models, much nicer than I draw them. So just head to www.mydailyleadership.com/podcast. Okay, let's get back to it, shall we? Abraham Wald, never heard of him. I get it. Okay, cool. Guy was a genius. Let me tell you this. This is on page 163, by the way. Abraham Wald was a statistician. He was a Jew who'd been chased out of Hungary. Right, this is kind of like right at the beginning of World War II, and he made his way to America, and eventually, I'm going to read this because I don't want to get this wrong, took a position in New York with the statistical research group SRG. His job, the job that he was given, was to figure out how to best armor plate the underside of fighter planes in World War II. What was happening is fighter planes were going out into the world, right? And they were getting into dogfights and all of that kind of stuff. And they were delivering ordnance and they were fighting other planes from the Luftwaffe, I suppose. And a lot of them were getting shot down, of course, right? From anti-aircraft guns, flak guns, right? On the ground, who were listening for the engine sounds. They had those big searchlights. You've seen it in the old movies, right? And they would see the planes and and start sending barrages of flak into the air. And some of them were getting hit, and those that were getting hit were crashing and not making it back. And it was actually, if anybody knows anything about bombers in World War II, you could do worse than read the book Catch-22 by Joseph Heller about how most people on those fighter missions and bombing missions, they didn't come back, right? They had an expected life expectancy of like 3 or 4 missions, like really bad. Abraham was given the job, or the SRG was given the job of trying to figure out how do we get the armor under the planes better such that more of our pilots, more of our boys, more of our planes can come back. Now, the problem with armor and planes, especially fighter planes, is it's heavy. Not that it's expensive, but it's heavy, and that slows maneuverability down, slows speed down, slows the rate at which you can climb and all of that kind of stuff, right? Cornering and turning, and the more armor plate you put in a plane, the less effective it is. We want fast and light and maneuverable, and armor plate kills all of those things. So it was a really tricky situation. And what they were doing is, prior to Abraham getting on the job, of course, is they were looking at the planes that were coming back, all the planes that were landing, and they were studying the underside of the planes. Right, why the underside? Because that's where the flak was coming from. And they were looking at all the holes in the planes, and they were figuring out, well, these are all the holes in the plane, so that's where we need to put all of the armor. And yet, it wasn't working because the planes were still not coming back until Abraham got on the gig, and Abraham said, okay, well, explain to me what we've been doing. And they said, well, look, so we've been looking at all of the planes that have made it back, let's say 200, and we've been analyzing them and statistically trying to find out where all of the bullet holes go. And then we see that they're all under the wing in this area, in this area, in this area. And that's where we've been putting all of our armor plate. And Abraham went, well, hold on a minute. Just hold on. Hold the phone. Those planes have all made it back. We should put the armor plate where the holes are not. Because it's the ones that are getting shot in the places that the planes that are making it back, who are making it back, but those others aren't making it back, that's where we should put the armor plate, where the holes are not. And that was his aha moment. Everyone else was putting armor where the holes were. And Abraham, his moment of insight was, but these planes have made it back. So the damage is fine. It's not great, but we can live with that damage. What we can't live is the damage where the planes aren't coming back. So let's put the armor plate where the holes are not. Genius. Okay, last one. But I've just been having a conversation with the producers because we have so much. We're going to talk about fish, right? I was going to talk about baking. I was going to talk about loyalty cards, coffee shop loyalty cards, if you've got any of those. All in the book. Check it out. We don't have time. Let's talk about fish. So, in the 1970s, right? So, the Japanese fishing industry were in the middle of a pretty big crisis. Before the 70s, in Japan, if you had a boat, you could just go out and fish, right? The Japanese islands were replete with fishermen who had small boats and would go out and fish, and they would catch some fish and they would cook what they caught, and the stuff that they couldn't cook because there was too much, they sold, right, in local markets. You can picture the scene. But because this was all very unregulated, a few Japanese fishermen figured, do you know what? If I got a bigger boat, I could catch more fish and then I could feed my family for longer. But not only that, I could sell more fish. And so some particular Japanese fishermen invested in buying bigger boats to go out and catch more fish. And that's what they started to do. And then other fishermen went, okay, that's not now just a living, that's making a living, and that's actually making a business out of fish, right? And because up to late 60s, early 70s, that kind of wasn't a thing in Japan. It was very much a cottage industry, and you caught what you killed, right? And again, it was unregulated. So before too long, the inland sea, right, you know, the kind of the coast right off the coast of Japan was being overfished. And as a consequence of that, the size of the fishes they were catching, of the fish they were catching, started getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. Why? Because it was just overly densely fished. Now, the Japanese palate is very sophisticated. They love sushi, as you probably know, probably love it yourself, right? And they knew what good fish was tasting like, and the fish were getting smaller and they maybe a little bit weaker and weren't as developed, and the taste wasn't quite right. And so the consumer, the Japanese consumer, started complaining that, you know, fish just isn't what it used to be. Again, because it had been overfished, right? And what was happening then is the Japanese fishermen were having to go a little bit further out to catch the bigger fish. Makes sense. Now, as they were going further out to catch the fish, economically, it didn't kind of make a whole lot of sense. So they needed, if they were going to go further out, they needed a bigger boat. So they were now investing in bigger boats. And if they now that had invested in bigger boats that they had to pay for, they certainly had to catch more fish. So they were going further out and catching more and more and more fish, and basically extending the margin, if you like, of the overfished seas off the coast of Japan. But that wasn't the real problem. The real problem was that instead of a local fisherman in his small boat going out to catch a fish, right, hitherto was the case, and then bring it back fresh and killing it and eating it that day and selling it that day to, their neighbors in the local market. Now that they had to go further out to catch the fish, maybe they would spend a night out, maybe a night and 2 days. And so that by the time day 2 came around and they brought all the fish home, it wasn't as fresh. And again, Japanese palate, super sophisticated, was saying, okay, so the fresh is bigger and stronger and tougher and all of that good stuff, but it just doesn't kind of taste as fresh. And so they had to deal with this freshness issue. So first of all, they had to deal with the size and the quantity issue. Now they had to deal with the freshness issue. Well, okay, they said, here's what we'll do. What we'll do is we'll make much bigger boats. And we'll make these bigger boats, right? More people on the boats. What's happening to the cost of fish, by the way? Well, we know that the cost of manufacture, right? The overhead cost is like going through the roof. And unfortunately, the quality is coming down. But now they're making very big boats with ice stations on board. So they were catching the fish, going out further out, deeper, more, bigger boats, more crew, ice plants on board, catching the fish, kind of fresh, freezing it on board, bringing it back a week later, perhaps, frozen, and then unfreezing it and then selling it as quote unquote fresh. But the Japanese palate could taste the difference between a frozen salmon, right, and a fresh salmon, and also a farmed salmon and a wild salmon. They could taste all of these differences. Okay, so what are we going to do now, thought the Japanese fishing industry? Well, what about this, they said. What about if we make massive boats? If we can't freeze the fish, what about this? What about if we make massive boats filled with tanks, right, filled with seawater? We'll go out far. Lots of crew, big nets, catch loads of fish, put them in these vats, put them in these tanks, right? And in 2 weeks come home, but they've been swimming all of the time. And by the time we come back to shore, like they're fresh, right? Because 2 minutes ago they were alive and now, right? So now they're in the market. The problem is, because the Japanese, and what's the cost doing? The cost doing this and the quality is doing this. Because, unfortunately, as hard as it is to believe, the fish that were caught and were just wild, put into these vats on these boats, swimming around for a couple of weeks, maybe a week, 5, 6, 7 days before they got home, we were actually becoming a little fat and lazy and sloppy and right, a little bit like me. Before that, in that very short period of time before they were then taken to market. And so the Japanese fishing industry was at a huge crisis. We don't know what to do, right? Cost of fish have done this, quality of fish have done that. Everybody can taste farm fish. Everyone can taste frozen fish. There's no fish left, right by the shore, where tanks aren't going to do it, filled with seawater. We're fairly screwed. Anyway, as it happens, one of the chairmen of the largest fish companies in Japan was friends with the guy that ran the Tokyo Aquarium. I can't remember his name, probably in the book. And they were having lunch one day, and the CEO of the fishing company was bemoaning his situation, the facts that were going on to his friend who ran Tokyo Aquarium. And he said this during lunch as a moment of insight. He said, well, why don't you put a shark in the tank? And the guy said, well, because the shark will eat all of the fish. Well, the shark will certainly eat some of the fish, said his friend, but it's not going to eat all of the fish. And if anything keeps fishes on their toes, so to speak, don't write in, I know they don't have any, it's having sharks around. So do you know what they did? They got a few little sharks, right, and put them in the vats and saw to see what happened. Off they went out into the deep, caught lots and lots of fish, put them in the tanks with the sharks. The sharks were delighted because the free lunch was provided. And then they came home. But the sharks didn't eat all of the fish. They only ate some of the fish, like a really small percentage of the fish. But you know what? A bit like the Abraham Hicks story, the fish that the sharks didn't get, man, they were like Olympic athletes, right? They were the fittest, smartest, most desperately fit fish. And the problem was solved, right? Because they weren't lazy and sloppy and old and... right? They were the fittest, healthiest fish. And so the principle of putting a shark in your tank, right, is a principle that we teach all of our leaders, right? Where do you need to put a shark in your tank, right? Something that's going to be intentionally difficult, intentionally put the company under stress to get you to the next level. Where's your shark in the tank insight, shark in the tank aha moment? Tell you a super quick story. When we were about 6 years into the Miami business, Carlos and I, we were having our quarterly shark in the tank meeting. So we got senior guys together every quarter, and the meeting was called Shark in the Tank, right? Where we're going to put a shark in the tank, right? What we actually did was we had moved a couple of times to bigger premises. And in the building that we're in, the whole of the second floor became free. And that was huge. And it was something like 10 times our rent. And we said, look, if we just, let's do it. Let's put a shark in our tank. Let's take it. If we build it, they will come, right? That whole attitude, the world is full of possibilities, not limitations, right? And we took the second floor and we kitted it out, and it was absolutely phenomenal. But we really had no right to do so. But we thought, let's do it. Let's put a shark in our tank. It'll make us prospect more, it'll make us sell more, it'll make us do more, it'll make us work harder and all of that kind of stuff. Because we had to do it. We were Cortez. We burnt our boats. That's also in the book if you want to check that out. So so the question is this: not only thinking about Apple and Walmart and Bata shoes and Japanese fishermen and all of the stuff we talked about today, where can you put a shark in your tank? Because when you put a shark in your tank, necessity is the mother of invention, right? And oftentimes that's where your aha moment will come from. That's it. I hope you've enjoyed today's session. I hope there's something you thought, yeah, do you know what? I hope you had an aha moment. You thought, do you know what? I could try that. I could give that a go. I hope so. Before we wrap up, I'd love to hear your takeaways. What insight story resonated with you most? What was your biggest single aha moment? What's one thing that maybe you plan to do differently as a consequence of watching this episode? Do leave a comment. Do let me know. A big thank you for being here today as always. And I do hope this episode offered you something of real value, even if it's just one tool, one tip, something that improves your leadership ability, even by only 1%. Remember, there's enormous power in marginal gains over time. Be sure to like, follow, and subscribe so you don't miss out on future episodes just like this one. Now, in the next episode, we're heading into the world of sales. If your business needs to grow, ... I think you know what I'm saying. Okay, so I'm Antonio Garrido from My Daily Leadership. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time, by wisdom and effort, see you soon.